Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are here in the afternoon of day two here in Raleigh. Moved the massive studios out here to All Things Open here in downtown Raleigh. Josh, welcome back to the show, helping me host this afternoon, and glad to have you back.
Thank you. It's a tough job. Somebody's got to do it.
That's right. And, we're lucky. We've been hitting a lot of different topics while we're out here, everything from data science and big data and things that we don't cover a whole lot of. We did 3D printing this morning. We're going to get back a little more to what we tend to do around here. We're excited to have Chris Short, Global DevOps Engineer from SolarWinds with us. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And so you are actually, give us a little bit of your background, but you're actually sort of a true frontlines DevOps engineer. You're living this stuff every day.
Yeah, I'm not talking about it or much talking about it yet.
That's right.
So my background is I was actually worked for a small dial-up ISP in the late 90s, and then dot-com bubble hit, joined the Air Force. Was in the Air Force for 11 years and got out. Jumped back into the open source world and been doing that for the past 7 years. Currently doing DevOps for SolarWinds MSP here in Raleigh.
Yeah, nice. So what does that mean, DevOps these days? I mean, so you're part of a SolarWinds. People know what they do. They're in management and system management. But what are you doing day to day?
So day to day, SolarWinds acquired my company, which used to be called LogicNow. It's now SolarWinds MSP, so I don't know where it falls in the whole corporate umbrella.
Yep.
The day-to-day is working on the various products we have. There's two of which that I'm working on the most right now. One's a remote management platform. The other is a mail delivery platform, but it's not like the Gmail, Office 365. It's not MailChimp. Yeah, it's like that go-in-between for marketing, but not marketing, maybe spam cleanup, that kind of thing. So, delivery success is what we're after with that product. So, I mean, day to day, it's DevOps. There's some firefighting. There's some working with developers to fix things. There's, one-off kind of issues that you have to eliminate technical debt from.
Right.
And that's a lot of what I'm doing right now.
Okay. So, if you were in the dial-up ISP days, that's a lot of, you never know what's going to happen day to day. And we all know the screeching modem, and you're like, damn it, it worked, or it didn't work. And then you get in the Air Force.
Oh boy.
You've got a long list of stories, but I mean, you were deployed out with Iraqi Freedom. You were out in the middle of the desert, and now you're back doing this stuff. Give us a sense. The DevOps community likes to talk about what the perfect enterprise business environment should look like. Right. You've got military, which is a whole different sort of way of looking at things. Compare and contrast some things for us.
So and when you land in the middle of a desert and you're given a tent and a bunch of equipment to put together and make blinky lights do stuff to go drop bombs on things, this is all you get, right? The chances of getting something else is days, weeks away potentially. So whatever you do, you just make it work, right?
Yeah.
If you have a problem, you figure it out. If you have some weird one-off thing, well, you find a workaround, and it's got to be based off what you have with you.
Right.
Here now in this day and age, if you don't have a tool or something you need, you go to GitHub and you install it, and off you go. And you want to tweak things, you can tweak it and then commit that back upstream. So it's a completely different dichotomy from the military days. But the one thing that remains consistent throughout is processes make things better all the time.
Right.
So in the world of the military, where it was semi-structured, but when it really mattered, you just got it done, you always step back now and say, okay, how does this fit into a current process, and do we need another one potentially? Where back then there is either a process or you were just winging it. Right.
But a lot of, you guys were doing a lot of practicing, a lot of documenting things, a lot of there's structure and process and.
There's two funny things I've seen as far as let's follow the process the military gave us, and they've gone horribly wrong. We're doing a practice exercise in Tampa, Florida, on MacDill Air Force Base there, and We set up a microwave radio link between two locations on the base, and it's just line of sight, stand up a tower, a little radio antenna on top, off you go. We were having a problem communicating between the two sites, so they just kept increasing the wattage and increasing the wattage and increasing the wattage, and eventually trees got set on fire, like somewhere midstream there.
Birds falling out of the sky.
Yeah, I mean, the scrambled eggs bursting out of birds' nests and stuff. So it was, it was like, okay, what did we do wrong here? We didn't do anything wrong except for account for pine needles. So, I'm sorry, it was dry. There's nothing in the manual about dry conditions, and obviously you could set things on fire when you point large microwave bursts at it.
Right.
So that's by the book gone wrong. Another scenario is I have a picture of myself in uniform sitting in a communications closet on the base formerly known as Pope Air Force Base down in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And I'm sitting in the communications closet. And the reason I'm sitting is because I'm sitting on a toilet that's underneath like a $3,000 Cisco switch for this building. So like one bad plumbing mistake and this building goes off the network. Like all services gone because we were using VoIP and video over IP and everything.
So which came first though, the toilet or the switch?
The chicken. The toilet was there first, and they're just like, oh yeah, we need some place to put this thing. Fine. There was nothing in the nothing in the manual about, hey, one switch on one shelf should not be put in a water closet, or electronics and water don't mix. Is like common sense is not common, is what I tell people when I show them that picture.
Yep.
It just doesn't compute sometimes.
Right. Yeah. So you're back in the sort of real world.
Yeah.
We were talking before. You're now starting to get out and speak at some of the events. You're out at DevOps Days Detroit. Josh tends to be at lots and lots of the DevOps Days. I'm curious, both of you guys, to sort of, what are you seeing at these events these days, and compare and contrast it to your day jobs versus, kind of what's being, taught and educated to people.
So what I'm seeing is there's no such thing as like a mature DevOps organization. Everybody's trying to do it as best as they can with the things that they have. But as far as like, hey, greenfield DevOps, there's always this legacy piece hanging out there. There's always some thing that can be done better. But everybody's just trying to do a little bit better every day. So the continuous improvement process is what I'm most interested in. And it's not necessarily tools, it's not necessarily culture, but it's just a combination of both that's going to drive organizations and companies into the right directions, what I'm observing.
Yeah. Josh, you and I were talking earlier, like you have this, when you go and talk to various DevOps things, it's very much about sort of less kind of purist about culture. It's about sort of just get things done, right? Your job is to get home at the end of the day or make it work. Like, what do you see? I mean, do you feel like the DevOps community is over-rotated on culture and hugs and empathy, or is it just a different way of presenting things and approaching things?
I just don't want to get paged, but that's just me.
Yeah. And so it's interesting. I had an opportunity when I was in London recently to talk to Patrick Dubois, who was the one who kind of coined DevOps. Yep. And in that conversation, I kind of asked him, like, kind of what led you to this? And he basically was talking about how he really wanted his job to be a little bit easier to deal with, bring the stress level down, just have better outcomes.
Yeah.
Without losing your hair and adding gray. And for me, having spent a decade plus advocating automation and doing all these things to make life simpler and be more consistent, and it's really interesting for me now to see this framework where people are like, oh, well, now I know how to apply this in a framework, to your point, where it's continuous improvement, right? It's, because even though everybody's always pushed automation, now we're in a situation where we can kind of do a pull mechanism. It's like, let's pull you in, let's do a small incremental improvement. And that conversation, I think, has been really interesting, and kind of seeing how people are applying that. And for me, it's less about where you were and where you're ending up, and much more of, to your point, how do you actually get something done? I think when you mentioned over rotation, I do think that there's a whole lot of conversation about culture and how to get started and things like that. And whenever I have those conversations, it always starts with, well, start by showing success, make an improvement in something that everybody agrees is a problem, that has a known value at the end, and just go from there.
Yeah. No, and I wonder sometimes if the DevOps community, the sort of hardcore, is becoming a little bit like the sort of the vegan CrossFit. Like, well, you don't do it well enough, so you're not really in. I mean, what do you? I mean, so you're in DevOps. I mean, you do
Right.
DevOps. Like, what is your day-to-day stuff? Like, if the word DevOps didn't exist, like, you're doing just efficient sysadmin types of stuff. But how much of it is dev versus ops, maybe?
So, I mean, a lot of what I do is a little bit of dev and a little bit of ops, right? So the way I look at it, because even people on my team specifically say that we're not doing DevOps, and it's like, yeah, okay, how many?
My title says otherwise.
Yeah, right. It's like how many sysadmins do you know that like know how to use messaging queues?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what I'm doing right now, and so. It's no knock on sysadmins or junior sysadmins that might not have that kind of distributed systems experience, but it is a level of systems administration that's beyond just CLI, service stop, service start, config files. Right? It is the integration of automation pieces as well as external services.
Yeah.
Now, would you though then say that that's more of a result of the different style applications we're supporting now? Because your traditional system administration for what Gartner would call a mode 1 application, very legacy application, that's not disappearing.
No,
I mean,
definitely
people are
not.
evolving from that, and they're trying
Right.
to migrate away from that framework. But I mean, it seems to me it's more about the applications that we now support that require us to have that additional skill set.
Absolutely, but a lot of that is transitioning those kind of
Yeah.
Gartner level 1, mode 1, whatever they call them.
That's pretty much how I feel about them too, by the way. But yes,
Yeah, so the old school monolithic, stack LAMP or Java running on Linux kind of thing it's evolving, right? It needs to be, horizontally scalable, for lack of a better term. And I rolled my eyes when I said that, but
we could hear it.
okay, good. The interesting thing is that the development teams often I've seen are not outmoding themselves, but they kind of they punch in, they log in, they sit down, they code, they solve JIRA tasks. But are they learning anything new while they're doing that? And sometimes that's a problem, right? Like some developers just like 9 to 5 develop. And they go home and then they're riding their bike or they're playing with their kids or whatever, and they're not trying to necessarily evolve. So I think that's where DevOps really kind of can come in and sit there and say, hey, I went to All Things Open, I learned something new. Feed it back into the system, or hey, I was reading on Hacker News last night or Lobsters or whatever, and I heard about this, and I think it might help us. What do you think? And then you end up with a developer whose mind is blown a little bit, but then the process improves.
Yeah.
So the idea of a DevOps team is nothing but people that either dev'd or ops or combination of both. I mean, my DevOps team, we actually have a junior sysadmin on it.
Yeah.
Why? Well, because sometimes it's easier to say, here's a playbook that I wrote. It works. Make sure it finishes successfully everywhere. And, oh, yeah, by the way, here's what it does. See if you can figure out some other problems to solve in the process.
Or even better, take it a step forward. How can we improve this process?
Bingo.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think one thing that I've run against time and time again when we look at DevOps and even software defined for that standpoint, it's really about that feedback. Like how do you react once you get additional information about how things are behaving, how things are operating, how things are moving, to either adjust for that or to create improvement from that.
Right. Yeah, the most mature DevOps team that I work with, because each one of our products could have a development operations team tagged along with their developers, and then the global team sits not necessarily above them, but between them. They're doing some amazing things with their Ansible repo to where there's a makefile that pulls all these different repos together and builds the testing frameworks out. So all you have to do is create a new branch, do some work, check it in, and you can either use Test Kitchen to test your playbooks right there on your box, or push it up to GitLab, and GitLab CI just knocks it out of the park and can prove that your playbook's going to work in our environment no matter what. Okay,
but here's the thing. Like you just did the quintessential description of how you've got everything working great. How long did that take?
Oh, it took me a while to even learn how to use it when I first joined the company, right? My mind was blown. It's like, hey, we're using server spec, we're doing this, we're doing that. And it's still in, some evolutionary state, because while we've done all this cool stuff with GitLab and everything else to do all this testing, our inventory is still 100% manual. Right. And we're using rack space. Yep. So there's an API there we could use, but we want, differentials in grouping that Rackspace isn't really going to give us right out of the box. So the problem we're having is, hey, we have groups, great. We actually have 700 groups for like 100 servers. Wow. Like, that's a problem, right?
Yeah.
Like, so it's like you never really know, like, is this the right group to use? So we still have challenges. We've just dedicated time to testing first, as opposed to maybe some of those organizational things that a lot of people spend a lot of time with at the beginning. Yeah. So it's just a matter of which problem do you want to solve first, and which way do you want to solve it best?
Right. I want to rewind a little bit of what you guys just both said. So one of the things that I think sometimes comes across at some of the DevOps events or these events, that, these are really good, experienced speakers. They're kind of living on the bleeding edge. There's always this, like, are you doing microservices and cloud native, and are you, and kind of what I heard from you, and don't take this the wrong way, which was, your application, at least one of your applications is, related to mail, right, which is by no means anybody would say cloud, but there is now applications of using mail that people would like to get updated as soon as some transaction happens. Like, oh, here's a tracking number, here's the confirmation. But at the same time, if you can run an application like that in a very cost-effective way, so for example, that, like, hey, every day at 7 o'clock we send out blasts of tens of thousands of them, and then I could shut those down. So a lot of what you guys are doing doesn't necessarily always have to be a new modern cloud-native application, but how you manage it from a cost perspective, from a consistency perspective, does allow you to use Ansible, use new tools, use DevOps sort of philosophy and technologies and stuff. Is that, do you find a little bit of that you don't want to overwhelm people that, oh, you can't get started unless you're using sort of the latest and greatest? So
I'm going to sound like Morpheus on this one. What if I told you AWS is expensive? So we actually have, a very hybrid kind of presence. Yeah. Our West Coast data center is, for the most part, bare metal. Yeah. Like, we're not even running VMs. We're starting to, because a lot of our workload is getting a little bit more distributed, so we can use it better. It's a big Java app at the moment, so we're breaking it up into smaller pieces. But yeah, at 10 a.m. every day, we get a massive influx. Right. And then, like, on Tuesdays or something, like the big marketing day, we get a massive influx of mail. And, our application is having issues scaling as more and more customers come on board. Sure. Obviously, that's a good problem to have. Yeah, right.
But I think we all like those problems.
Yeah, it's a great problem, but it's, when it's just, that's what you do every Tuesday, it's like, okay, we need to fix this faster. Right. So, the notion of you have to be on AWS or you have to be in Azure if you're on Windows, it's not like... Yeah, it's not a Bible.
I haven't heard you say Docker one time. I haven't heard you say containers.
You're
running your business without those things.
How could you do DevOps without Docker?
Well, we actually do use Docker. Oh. It's just local testing, right?
Okay. Right tool for the right place.
So I'll do a subtle plug. SolarWinds is hiring for somebody to come work on my team, and one of the questions I ask people is, what do you think of containers in production? And the correct answer is typically, we're not there yet, right? Like, it's not ready for prime time on, like, the large grand enterprise scale. Even though people are doing it right now, like, I'm trying to do that with my personal website. It's just go ahead, throw it in containers and be done with it, right? Move it around as I see fit. But the let's put a huge monolithic Java app in a container, not going to happen, right? You have to get from A to B. Mm-hmm. So you have to start splitting things up code-wise and operationally so that can happen and it can be containerized. But if you want to do testing with server spec and test kitchen, you can do that in Docker files all day.
Right, sure. Right.
Well, one thing I've seen that seems to be a truism as we talk about which technologies people are adopting and how they're doing it, and even from a maturity standpoint, one thing that seems consistent to me is that time to value. Like, everything is about how quickly you get what you need, how consistently, how you have this level of trust that when you need something, it'll be delivered, whether it's a container or a virtual machine, whatever. Like, that seems to be the real metric for people when they talk about whether or not they're being successful as they're moving forward. Like, that they can trust that whatever they need to do is going to come out the other end correct. I mean, that's not quite immutable or but
Sure.
getting towards that standpoint.
And the biggest problem I think most DevOps folks have is, do their priorities line up with business priorities, right? I mean, unless you're, at a Red Hat or like a Mozilla or Linux Foundation, like your business is probably out there to make a profit.
Yeah.
Like even Red Hat to an extent.
Yeah, we
is
enjoy
out there
profit,
making
sure, yeah.
profits. So when you're DevOpsing, I'm going to make that a verb now. But when you're out there DevOpsing, and the business comes along and says, "Hey, we really need you to focus on X," and it's taking you completely away from building, a new pipeline for delivery or something, you kind of get frustrated,
Right.
And that's fine. But the thing you have to realize is that work is important, and you have to convey the importance of it to management to make them realize a little bit of effort here, while it might not make us dollars this quarter, is going to make us dollars for the next 5.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's always been the trade-off of automating anything. If somebody
Right.
goes, well, why would I spend the money and time to do this when I can do it myself? And you go, like, you got to be forward-looking for it.
Absolutely.
Well, and at the same time, one of the things that I think, I'll target IT folks that, we get very accustomed to talking about our problems and our needs and the things that we're doing, and not necessarily been very good at understanding, like, well, how does our company actually make revenue? Like,
Right.
how do they make money?
Yeah.
Like, I deal with this on a regular basis as is, even working for an infrastructure company, when talking about like, which integration should we do next? I'm like, does any of them help us make money?
Right.
Like, that would be where I would start.
Yeah.
But I think it's very common for IT organizations to not understand how a company generates revenue and how what they do impacts revenue. And that's actually one of the things that really excites me about DevOps getting the cultural momentum that it has, like, within our industry, because now we've got this common, like, conversation construct that we can have, whether or not you're a business leader, whether you're a development leader, site reliability engineer,
Right,
sysadmin. Like, you all have this opportunity to say, okay, like, how do we actually impact one another?
So to kind of bring things full circle from my perspective, is one thing I did learn in the military, which is very valuable to that point, is quantifying things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, every year I would have an evaluation, and chances are I was doing the rough draft of the evaluation and handing it to my boss to, like, put the finishing touches on it or whatever, and I would have to quantify, like, I did X, it saved Y, and taxpayer money is saved, right? So bringing that perspective into an operations or development or a DevOps organization is very helpful to people, because I can walk up to the CTO and say, hey, I need 8 hours, which cost X based off my salary and benefits and everything else, to do this thing, and it's going to save us all this time later on, which I can then quantify again into numbers, and they'll just sit there and be like, yeah, do it.
Yep.
How much does it cost to do it? Just man to power. That's it.
Yeah. Let me ask one last question, and we'll kind of bring it around to what both of you guys are talking about in terms of the business relevance of this. So you just went to DevOps Days Detroit. You sort of say, this is the first time I've given one of these talks.
Right.
So Josh, I understand why you go to all of them. It's part of your job.
It has a little bit to do with it.
There's a connected to money. What made you want to get out and talk, and then what made it that your company is going to support you to being out there?
So actually, one of the goals that my manager gave me was, hey, I want you to learn a new language, and I want you to do a talk on something, something you're passionate about. And, well, okay, fine. I'm a veteran. I have to deal with the VA system. I'm also into technology, so I'm passionate about two things. How can I smash things together? For a while, I was putting out, a draft talk for, like, hey, here's how you use Ansible Vault in, like, the most practical way. It's not as hard as you think. Off you go. But then when I came up with the idea of merging the two ideas of DevOps and military service together, that's when I said, this could be a hit, and submitted the talk to a couple of different places, and DevOps Days Detroit was the first one that snatched it up. So I said, okay, fine, I'm going to do that. So my mentor or, boss, however you want to call it, he kind of inspired me to say, hey, get out there and spread a message of some sort. Yeah. So the location of Detroit was easy because my wife's family's from there. So, free room and board kind of makes it easy to convince the company to buy the plane ticket. Yeah, exactly. So, I missed the submitting to for probably about like a week or something. So that would have been the easiest point, so I picked the next one. So, I mean, it wasn't like I didn't want to speak, but it definitely made a lot of sense once I actually got the idea in my head to do it.
Yeah. Well, it makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. I mean, one, you're talking about you've got to be able to communicate to people about why to do something. So it forces you to publicly be a good communicator or begin to get that skill. Your company's hiring, so it's an opportunity to be out there and
spread the message.
Spread the message. Talk about doing cool stuff, and it's a good personal skill to get out. It's hard to get up in front of people and communicate stuff if
Absolutely.
it's not your thing. So, well, listen. First off, thank you for your service to the country.
Thank you.
We don't thank you guys enough for that. But thank you for coming on. It's
no
a good
problem.
conversation, Josh. Thanks for being here all day. I think we're gonna wrap up from All Things Open here in Raleigh. Thanks, folks, for listening, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.